At the end of your life, what will be your legacy? What will you leave behind for future generations? For the world, join the World Messenger, Izabela Lundberg, each week as she brings you a new distinguished guest from the business, sports, or entertainment world to share their success, their struggles, and their lessons. They will share their insights into current hot topics that affect everyone. Izabela facilitates an intimate, vulnerable environment to find the true value of humanity and real leadership. Are you ready for your legacy? The legacy that matters?
What would you do if you're exposed to sexual trauma and just don't simply know the way out? Or being too long part of something that's you just know it's unhealthy and it's not right, but you don't have confidence or strength or brevity to step away, or support system that can help you and your family? What would you do if you could be braver? An answer is lying into something that is forming and that's beautiful. And I absolutely cannot wait to share with all of you. How can we all be part of Braver Collective? Specifically, if we know anyone that is being affected by sexual torture or trauma and simply don't have a way out. Today's guest is going to shed some light, specifically how Braver Collective came about. He comes from wealth of experience in financial industry. He's a former vice president for JPMorgan, been in financial system for decades, and brought some really great perspective how he transitioned and what he's doing today to impact positively so many lives. Without further ado, let me introduce you to co-founder, or actual founder and executive director of Braver Collective, Scott Dille. Scott, welcome.
Thank you, Izabela. Pleasure to be here.
Likewise. You obviously, oh my goodness, where do we unpack all of this? You have such a tremendous background professionally, obviously, and so many things that you accomplished personally. And the fact that now you are doing something different completely from corporate America and going into nonprofit sector, it just shows that it's possible to always step into not only our passion, drive, and desire to meet and make tremendous difference. So, Scott, before we dive in, how did you get to this point? Do you mind sharing a little bit about everybody watching and listening? How did you get in financial industry and what that taught you?
Sure. Thank you. Yes, I was in financial services for almost 40 years, most of that in the wealth management business for large banks, first in Texas and then in Chicago. My experience in the wealth management business in particular, I think, helped me to focus and to understand the nature of what was most important through the lens of the people we served. And over time, that became more and more my fascination, understanding problems that had a sense of lived experience, where the person that you were designing for, whether it was designing a investment portfolio around the goals of their family, or whether it's designing a solution to support survivors of sexual trauma, there's a thread of that is around understanding and having, I think, the appropriate humility to know that we don't have the answers individually, that the answers that we seek to serve others are found with them. And I had a series of experiences that allowed me to go deeper in that direction. Through beyond the wealth business, the last few years, I was working at one of JPMorgan's competitors, Northern Trust, a very client-centric, employee-centric organization, and co-led a number of strategic objectives that had a client focus, an employee focus. Ultimately brought into the organization a human-centered digital design lab that I co-led with a really amazing designer. And we used the resources from that lab, our human-centered approach, and these really amazing designers to try to solve some of the more complex problems that either our clients faced or our employees faced from their perspective. And to invite them in not only to help us define the problem or the problems that were really worth solving, but also to co-create the solutions. From a business perspective, what that did for us was give us more confidence that we were investing in solving problems that clients really cared about, or employees really cared about. And we were doing it in a way that was more likely to create value for them.
Wow. I love, first of all, we know that financial industry is going through so much shift and change that they can possibly consume it with regulations, with economy on global scale, the threats, the security, you name it. But one piece that I love that you've been in center of is that human dynamics and human design. Do you mind elaborating a little bit more? Because it's really very progressive, because we know that a lot of these organizations don't want to change. And I know that this knowledge can be versatile used in so many different avenues, including nonprofit sector, which we will get into second. But do you mind expanding a little bit more for everybody watching and listening, specifically from leadership standpoint, that they can possibly consider and tap into in their organizations?
Sure. So the design world, whether you're designing, a written publication, or you're designing a website, or you're designing a new business, it doesn't function that much different than most large businesses, certainly the corporate industries that I've been a part of, where most of the solutions they might bubble up from the person you desire to serve, say a client, but at some point, someone in the organization decides they have the answer, or some 2 or 3 people decide they have the answer, and they turn away from the client and they go about making their case and getting the resources and designing the solution and rolling it out into the world. And expect that the client, in this example, would find value in that. And too often what happens is the gap that occurs after you stop listening and when you design the solution and launch has a disconnect. And none of us really, again, have the answers to solve some of the most complex problems we have to solve. All the complex problems that we were working on required 2 things, I'd say. One is a strong sense of collaboration, so bringing in multiple perspectives, multiple lenses into the problem. And also, and I would say most importantly, really understanding the lived experience of the person you're designing for. Now, that doesn't apply to every problem that businesses face, right? There's plenty of problems where the problems are not that complex, and even if they are, the solutions are fairly straightforward. Just think about a math problem, right? You don't need a human-centered approach to decide what 2 + 2 equals. But if you do want to understand the complexities of, saying, transitioning wealth for multiple generations, and what the implications are for the patriarch and the matriarch, and the first generation, the second generation, and the third generation, and how to retain your sense of values throughout the generational transfer and so on. That's an example of a type of a business problem. We're spending time with each one of those groups and inviting them in to join with you in creating solutions is far more likely to be successful. And that comes out of a discipline called human-centered design, which focuses on problems that have a lived experience at their core. It's been widely used by some of the most prestigious innovation and design firms in the world, IDEO kind of chief among them. Unfortunately, despite the fact that it's been proven to be very effective, it's not very widely used for 2 main reasons, or maybe 3. One, there is a specialized expertise associated with it. So human-centered designers have an expertise around deeper ethnographic research. And things like ethnographic research, where you're really spending a lot more time with people to understand what's going on in their lives and where they might need support or help, takes more time, which translates to more money. So it takes more time, it costs more money, and requires some specialized expertise. So it's not used as widely because it doesn't work. It's not used as widely because it costs more money, and people tend to jump to the kind of the Western notion that, we've got this, we understand what you need. just stand back and we'll circle back with the solution.
Thank you for explaining that. And I love how you contrast that, because sometimes the speed, it's not necessarily effective, and it doesn't necessarily yield results that needs to happen, especially when we're dealing with humans.
Exactly.
We're dealing due to severe traumas that we're going to dive into. Obviously, I'm sure that this knowledge you're purposing and leveraging heavily in what are you working on right now when we're dealing with those invisible wounds, as I call it, because not all the as we as humans experience are visible. It's harder for other people to wrap their head around, to accept, but also to learn how to truly support. And one of the hardest one is when we deal with sexual trauma, sexual torture, abuse, specifically when we're dealing with our early stages in our lives. So do you mind sharing a little bit of how you transition, obviously with the initiative that you are spearheading right now, and leveraging not only human design, but everything that you learned so far?
Sure, thank you. So it's interesting because it was actually almost 6 years ago. It was in January of 2018 when I was co-leading this lab for my day job, and found myself watching the USA gymnast testify against Dr. Nasser in that horrific trial that resulted in his conviction. And in my 50s, I was 59 when I was watching that the USA gymnast testify. But I was coming out of a long season of therapy to help me resolve some of the kind of sticky issues associated with my own history as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And I think I was at a place in my healing where I could really hear and see the broader community of survivors more clearly than I ever had, even though obviously I'd been a survivor all my adult life. But I heard in the voices of those gymnasts courage, a wisdom in even their small community, and a sense of compassion that gave me hope that there might be a way to deepen my understanding about the community and potentially use the toolkit that I had to try to make a difference in support of survivor healing. And I knew without looking at any of the statistics that this is a reality that's not only a part of our culture and our country in our time, but all cultures and all countries. And for as far back as history has been written, sexual trauma has been a part of our experience. As any forum where powerful men can victimize women and children, they do. And we see it, many examples in our current times. But I understood that this was an under-resourced space. I'd been trying to understand what happened to me as a survivor and how I'd been impacted and how I might heal for 40 years, right, at the time as an adult. And I knew that the lack of resources, I knew how difficult this was for us to talk about as a culture and as a people. And we all know that when we can't even have a conversation about something, it's almost impossible that it'll be properly understood and supported. 50 years ago, we couldn't talk about cancer in the United States. It was the C word, right? And as soon as we could finally move our way through that, then all of a sudden the resources poured. And we were seeing a change in our culture where with Me Too and some of the other courageous acts, there was just a sense that maybe the time was right and maybe this was an opportunity for me to do something that could make a real difference beyond the work that I'd been doing. So I immediately met with my co-leader in the lab, with my boss, who was the chief operating officer of the company at the time, and said, hey, this has happened. I feel like I need to try to explore this space and see what's possible. And with their support, I hired a couple of human-centered designers who are amazing to go out and just explore this space. And rather than, again, presume that I knew what everyone needed, even though I have strong feelings based on my own lived experience, we went out with 10 different concepts, very, very different ideas, and started talking to survivor healing experts, nonprofit leaders and activists and so on, and just said, if our aspiration is to try to make a difference at scale, where should we look? Where are the big gaps in this space? And just use their feedback to bring us back to what became a proof of concept for what we have since developed as Braver Collective, and that is a digital community, a safe, accessible, trauma responsive, and reliable digital community, a website that we built with survivors and for survivors to support our collective healing. And so I funded that and did that as a passion project as I worked in my day job. And it became clear over the next year or so that there was a lot of traction around this idea. And just in my own heart, if you will, for reasons I really can't even explain, I just felt like this is what I had to do. And I love my job. It was my favorite job I ever had. So it wasn't easy. I wasn't walking away from something I didn't like. I loved the company I worked for. In fact, there are 30 some senior executive leaders who are supporting our work, and it's just an amazing place. But I just felt like if I didn't do this work, if I didn't lead it, it wasn't likely to happen. So with their support, I left and started a nonprofit. And from there, we have done 2 additional projects to co-design, do research and co-design with survivors, using some really amazing social impact, human-centered designers, Firebelly Design in Chicago, and then more recently, Mary Forder Design in Field of Practice, whose specialty is working in the social impact space to go deep into understanding, again, what's most important to solve for, and then asking the people in our case, survivors of sexual trauma, survivor healing experts, to join with us to say if we're trying to solve for this gap, if we're trying to create something to fill the gap to support our healing, something we knew was missing, then what needs to be there? What should be present? And we've recently finished the co-design of the site itself. It should launch in mid-2024. Super excited about it. It has a lot of traction. So it's been quite a journey. I hadn't led a nonprofit before. I hadn't done an entrepreneurial venture before, although a lot of new, innovative ventures I think we were part of, but nothing like this. So it's been a lot of learning. I would say.
Seems like you're doing a lot of great things. And one of the key stuff that I'm hearing, obviously being part of prior company and having such a great culture and great supports from top leadership, it's truly unheard of. Doesn't happen often, and it's not often represented in definitely in current times. And that's, first of all, kudos on your leadership and your leaders that you've been surrounding yourself. And it's fantastic to hear how much they support you and how you are now leveraging human design and research and everything else. Even though as a survivor, what you could have, should have, needed at the time, right? But it's beautiful to see, because nothing really takes away as it does not feeling safe and having someone you can turn to and feeling supported, and do you have that trust and trusted environment that you can tell.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. In fact, you're likely familiar with Judith Herman, who wrote, I think, the seminal work on trauma called Trauma and Recovery.
Yes.
And, Judith Herman says a couple of things I think are relevant here. One is that it is natural for us to not spend a lot of time thinking about these things in our thinking mind, our prefrontal cortex, right? We tend to carve anything traumatic, we tend to carve it away and kind of go into denial and repression. I can't watch that anymore. That's actually normal. It just, the challenge with it is it ladders up to where, if that's the culture, where if the culture can't see it, and it impacts, in our case, in the US, a conservatively estimated 100 million people are survivors, right?
Oh.
And if you think for every survivor, let's hope there's at least one person who cares deeply for them. That's 200 million people. 2/3 of the United States are directly or very close, indirectly impacted by this issue. And it starts with just doing something about it, just starts with bringing it into our awareness. And all of us seeing it for what it is. And as I've done that, as I've had those conversations, two things have happened. One, on the sad note, the prevalence and the impact has manifested in a way that's been very clear. It's very, very difficult to have an authentic conversation with anyone about sexual trauma and them to reply that they don't know anyone, it hasn't happened to them, they don't know anyone it's happened to. Gee, that's interesting. If I've had this conversation 500 times, that might have happened to me 5 times. So it's just it's prevalent, it's everywhere. But the solution, I think, starts with seeing the issue and then joining together as we pursue a solution.
That is so true. And I love that you are venturing in this new avenue. Even you said you never done a nonprofit, but obviously you're setting it up for success with all the right key ingredients and having such a great support behind you. Working with a lot, obviously, different demographics that being exposed to a lot of suffering and including rape victims and sexual abuse, and specifically sometimes by the closest ones, the family members or people in the community should be trusted the most. Either is an educational or religious institution, so either is the neighbors and community, and specifically children are the one who suffer, and that affects the course of their life. And I love the name of your nonprofit, because we need to all be more braver with what we're doing and what's happening around us. But collectively, the bravery and confidence and it can only be done when you have right support system and right infrastructure. So for everyone watching and listening that is experiencing similar or desire to support and help, or have someone that they feel like they're not getting sufficient support and help, do you mind sharing, obviously you're launching this in summer of next year, sharing how people can get involved and how can they contribute their wisdom or support or desire to participate?
Sure. And I want to also go back to something you mentioned earlier about the importance of safety as a start point. Finding a community that can truly understand what's happened to you, that is safe, is very, very difficult and virtually impossible in the digital space. The digital space, most of us find to be very dangerous and complex and confusing. And finding one truth doesn't naturally lead to the next. So there's a lot of work to do, I'd say, in the digital space to create such a community. It's an opportunity I think we all have to participate. I love this word collective because the meaning, the generic meaning of collective is a community that's organized around a common purpose, and our common purpose is a community supporting our collective healing. And the way, as we worked with survivors, and by the way, we focused working with young adult survivors. On the average, adults don't talk about their story of their own abuse until they're 52, which I think is shocking to most of us. I was 59 when I started telling people beyond my own family, my close friends, that I was a survivor. So I'm not surprised with that statistic, but just the tragedy of waiting for decades before you begin to heal is something that we didn't feel comfortable with. So we're primarily focused on young adult survivors, but also responsibility to support healing for all trauma survivors. And as we asked this group of young adult survivors, okay, if you were to design a website to give you everything you need to support your healing, what would be present? And what they came back with were beyond just a safe, reliable place and a community of people who understand. They boiled it down to three things that will be present on the site. The first are the stories from the survivors themselves. We believe that survivors, as a survivor, I can tell you that I believe that only survivors can really understand the impact of sexual trauma. I think it's similar to the way soldiers in combat might feel, that if you weren't there with us, you, as well-intentioned as you might be, you probably don't really understand what I went through. That's very much the case for survivors of sexual trauma. So when we want to understand what happened to us and how we might heal, the voice we trust the most is the voice of other survivors. So the stories from survivors talking about how they've been impacted and what their healing experiences look like, for good or not, will be the cornerstone. We believe in the wisdom of that survivor community. To complement that, we'll have kind of the science, if you will, the evidence-based on resources and understanding around kind of the neurobiology of what happens to us when we're traumatized, what happens to our brain, what happens to our mind, how that impacts us over time, as well as the healing modalities that are used to support survivors of sexual trauma. You know, the mainstream, the cognitive behavioral therapy, and the more eclectic, you know, the EMDR, or, you know, more recently psychedelics, whatever is being developed and is evidence-based and that survivors can rely on. And then, so those are two of the three elements, the third being just survivors talking very specifically about their participation in certain healing modalities. So I used EMDR and I loved it. I used EMDR and I hated it. You know, whatever it is, it's not to take a position as a community on this versus that, because healing from sexual trauma is not nearly so neatly organized and linear. It's more to put information out there that survivors can rely on and wrap them with the community who cares, so they can determine what their own next best step to heal is. Because what Judith Herman will tell you, and we talked about earlier, is one of the most fundamental impacts of sexual trauma, and I would guess trauma more broadly, but certainly sexual trauma, is that we are disempowered, right? We lose all sense of agency over where we go from here. And so to equip survivors and support them so they can take charge of their own healing is, in my opinion, a must. Nobody can heal for one another. We can support each other, we can help each other learn, we can encourage, but at the end of the day, at least for sexual trauma, the healing is up to us.
And it's such a beautiful way also to help others to feel that is the better way to do it. And I love how you said it. Everybody has a different path for healing, and it's not one linear approach, but ultimately it is the one goal to be able to reconcile with the past, be able to reclaim back the strength, the confidence, and also to be braver so that quality of life can exponentially increase, and as a result also reconciliation with the past and opportunity to move forward.
Exactly.
A phenomenal goal.
Exactly. And to more precisely answer your question around how survivors and allies of survivors can help, if you go to bravercollective.org today, it's just kind of a landing page. But when the time comes and we're ready to launch, the opportunity over time is going to be to contribute your own story. I was literally in the bank in my little community yesterday, but talking to a young adult survivor and offering her the opportunity to bring her story when we launch, which is a really powerful story about her own trauma experience and healing. So there will be an opportunity for us to contribute our stories. There'll be an opportunity for us to talk about our own healing experience with various modalities, and there'll be a significant opportunity both on the site and also with our complementary social media presence that we'll launch, to be in community and to more proactively and visibly support each other as we work to heal.
That is fantastic. With that in mind, I'm curious if you don't mind sharing, Scott, what is your vision and objective and ultimately a legacy that you'd like to be remembered and known for with this chapter in your life? Obviously, you already carved phenomenal legacy with work you already did in financial industry and how many people you touch in organization, internally and externally through the customers. But I'm curious with this chapter, what is your aim?
Well, I believe in audacious visions, right? So our vision is to support healing for all survivors. And when we say all survivors, I really mean that. We're not designing this for a particular population or particular identity or particular geography or anything like that. We are designing and we are committed to support healing for all survivors. My contribution to that will be just in the sense of this collective, what I can bring to the table. We believe very much that we each have a unique toolkit, a unique set of experiences, a unique perspective that are equally valuable, just different. So this is not about, gee, look at me, lead this organization, I have all the answers, and everybody's going to remember my name 100 years from now. That's not what we're trying to do. My contribution is to create a space where we can come together and try to solve this problem in a more lasting, sustainable way that's not dependent on fixing all the problems in the culture, fixing the justice system, fixing this or that. I believe that we don't need to fix the world in order to begin to heal and to help each other heal. So I want, that's my hope, is that we can reach a deeper, more shame-free, stigma-free understanding of the reality that trauma, not just sexual trauma, but trauma writ large, is just something that happens to us. And we have this a set of unbelievable superpowers in order to survive it, that over time sometimes become maladaptive, if you will, that we need to unwind as we get older. But we know how to do that. There's plenty of research and science and lived experience to help each other get there. What I hope to do is just to create a space for that to occur that outlives me, hopefully by many, many centuries.
I love it. It's such a beautiful gift that not only it's so tremendously needed today, but I'm sure in decades to come, as we're involved and as we grow and progress in society, as well, population is increasing, problems are increasing, and it's such a refreshing to hear these new approaches to very complex solutions, as you said, that are being affecting so many for a longest period of time. And it's very important that we acknowledge them. And because, as they say, what we ignore constantly perseveres and constantly shows and surprises in most unexpected ways. But also you are supporting many other causes. And I just want to, first of all, kudos you for your time and effort to not only push forward what is important, obviously, based on personal experience and seeing how many people are affected, but just that philanthropic way of giving, also supporting others, and with different initiatives that are undergoing tremendous shift and change right now. So in closing, do you mind sharing for everybody watching and listening, for everybody that is on the fence, where to start, what to do, or who to support, or where to give their time and effort. Seems like you are so purposeful, so clear, and no doubt that you're going to accomplish, again, tremendous results. What would be your piece of advice for people that are truly struggling and cannot see things clearly yet?
Yes, so clarity's come after about 6 years of effort. So one of the things I believe in the most, and it has something to do with how we talk about Braver Collective as being a place where a survivor can, through these various mechanisms, find their next best step to heal. I'm a huge believer in just taking the next step, however you discern that next best step. And there are opportunities everywhere to take a step. I think with these really huge problems, I think we can be intimidated to the point of just walking away before we even start by the enormity of the problem. How are we going to solve healing for 100 million people in the United States and billions of people? I don't know. But what I do know is somebody I can call and somebody I can ask a question to and something I can learn. And then once I do that, I can then do the same thing again and take a next step and a next step and a next step. And you and I have a really good example with a friend we have in common, Mark McIntosh, who's a friend of ours, who is an amazing guy, who has, by virtue of a illness that's a disease that he's been infected with even in the last 12 months, he needs a kidney donation. And I don't know anything about kidney donations. I'm guessing, I don't know how much you knew before you waded into that space, maybe a lot, but I think for a lot of us, it's new. But I knew that I love Mac, and I believe that we do solve these problems together. And even though I don't know anything about that from a medical perspective, and I don't have that personal experience, I know that I can bring what I have to help Mac. And I think in particular, finding folks who dream big. So our buddy Mac, he's not asking for one kidney, although we want to make sure Mac gets his kidney. He has a vision to find 5,000 kidneys, as you know, to help 5,000 folks who need a kidney to live, and to support live organ donation, which I've learned is, we can share our spare, as he says, in his drive to 5,000. So I think if we open our eyes, if we understand, I think for many of us, our primary motivation may well come from our own lived experience. But beyond that, there's no shortage of opportunities. But I think it all not just begins, but continues by just taking the next step. Whatever you think your best next step is. We all are smart enough to figure out like what that might be or who it might be. Just do that and then commit to do it again and again and again. And you do that for a year, you're in a really different place.
Thank you for listening to Legacy Leader Show. If you enjoyed the content and had a positive experience, then please leave us a positive rating. In addition, leave us a positive review whenever you are listening on whatever platform there might be. Make sure your friends and family also know about the benefit and value that we provide and what we have to offer. Cheers.